Now let's explore some of the other properties of the trend control. If we go back to the design view of the trend control, we can right-click on the trend control and go to Properties. Starting at the top, we might want to anchor the trend control so that when we resize the form to top, left, bottom, and right, so that the trend control will resize when the application is resized itself. Let's take a look at what that looks like during runtime. So now if we resize the form, you can see the trend control resizes to the particular size you are interested in. Some of the other properties in the trend control: auto runtime set to true will automatically begin to request data from the real-time service for the time frame and sample rate that we have defined for the pens in the trend window. We've already looked at the chart rates. That's a key important property during real-time trending. The configuration property is very useful to be able to store operator changes during runtime of their own system. This way, they can have applications deployed all over the world, and each user can maintain his own settings that he has changed during runtime. You simply define this configuration file to a file name that will then be stored on the operator's computer. Under the legend property is where we can change the position of the legend. We can show the descriptions, engineering units, the values, those are the defaults. We can also optionally show the tag names of the data source of each pen. You can position the legend at the bottom, top, left, right. It's all up to you. You can determine how many rows and columns that you would like in the legend. You can also determine the back color of the legend, and you would want to then set the back plane visible to true if you wanted to overwrite that legend to a different color. Let's change that to dark gray, and we'll see that when we go back to the design mode. The chart margins property allows us to move the trend control within the window itself. If we change the bottom number of pixels from 15 to 20, we'll see more space at the bottom of the trend window. The Custom History Select property allows you to enable custom queries to your database to specify additional fields to put additional arguments. Let's take a look at what that is. So here we would type in a field name, say ramp, add that field, and then you could specify that history is only returned when the values are, say, less than 50. And then all data for all record sets would only return that data that matched that query. You can add up to 10 fields into a custom history definition. Under the missing data appearance, if we have bad quality or we're pulling history where data is not returned, you can specify what type of line style and thickness you want to display when the data is of bad quality. Under the toolbar property, we have the ability to change the toolbar position. The default is the toolbar is at the top. We can change it to the bottom, or to the left, or to the right. We can also change the size of the toolbar under the size property of toolbar. The default is medium. We can make it very small for high resolution monitors, or extra large for touchscreen applications. You can also disable the toolbar entirely with a visible property set to false, or you can individually disable each individual icon on the toolbar. There's also a runtime menu by right-clicking on the trend window during runtime, and we can disable that feature as well, and each individual selection during that runtime. Let me show you what that looks like during runtime. So now if we right-click on the trend window itself, This is the menu that I'm referring to that can be disabled entirely, or each individual feature can be disabled. You can see we can modify all of these properties during runtime, and you may want to restrict an operator from being able to change properties of the trend window. Under the Views property, we can change the rotation of the trend. We can set the property of the perspective view to perspective rotated. Maybe you want to do a vertical trend. The default is perspective trend, and if you just simply want the 2D effect, just set the perspective depth to 0. Under the Walls property, you can change the color of any of the back wall, left or right. Maybe a darker color. Or even make them invisible entirely. Under the X-axis property, we can determine what is the date and time format that is displayed under the X-axis. We can change that to just show time only. We can also determine how many major ticks there are on the labels. The default is 2. Let's set it to 4. We can now see that we have 4 timescales on the X-axis. You can also change the font of the X-axis time. Let's change that to a bold with the size of 12. You can also turn off the X-axis entirely with the visible property set to false. Under the Y-axis property, we have the scale mode. This is a very important property to determine the Y-axis scaling for your trend. Let's also change the font of the Y-axis. Let's go with 12 and bold. And under the scale mode property, let's change that from percent of pens, where each pen has its own range on a common Y-axis, to instead stacked percent of pens. And that way each pen has its own Y-axis range. To take advantage of that, we want to go back up to the pens property and set each individual pen property for the stacked chart number. We'll leave the ramp signal at the stack chart 1, change the random to stack chart 2, and the sign we'll set to stack chart 3. Now when we click OK, we'll see that each pen has its own range. Let's go into runtime and see what that looks like. Here you can see each pen has its own individual Y-axis scale. Now let's explore some of the individual pen properties further. Go back up to the pens property, browse for those pens. On the left we have the individual pens. The history tag property is used to specifically define a field name from the database that you want to return the data from. If you leave this blank, the OPC system service will automatically determine that field name for you. This way you can have your data logging engine on a different computer than the data coming from the real-time data. So that's where you would want to specify this property. The legend value format allows you to display how many digits to the right of the decimal point you want to display. There's also different line styles. The default is a line format, but you can also choose tube, tape, or ellipsoid. Let's set the ramp to ellipsoid. The random we'll leave at a line, but we'll take advantage of the marker style. We'll set that one to a sphere and change the marker fill color to a green. and change the marker size to 10. Under the sign pen, we'll change the line style to a tube. If we click OK, we can see this is the format that is displayed for each of the pens. Let's go back to the pens property and take a look at some of the other individual properties there. When you choose the property Show Values, each individual sample on the trend will be shown as its numeric value. If you want to show each individual y-axis scale when you're doing common y-axis mode, you can enable the property Show Y-axis Labels. Let's set that to true for all individual pens. Click OK. Now let's go back to the y-axis scale mode and set it to % of pens. And set the global y-axis visible to false. And let's go up to the chart margins and give us more room on the left so we can see all three y-axis scale. Set that to 40. There we can see now each individual pen has its own y-axis range, and the color is defined to what the pen color of each pen is. Let's take a look at what that looks like in runtime. There's our trend window. We can stop the trend, analyze the data. We can even rotate the trend upon any axis that we would like. As you can see, there are many properties of the trend control, but the basic ones are the chart rates and the pens. If you don't know what any of the properties are, simply select that property. For example, if we choose the scale mode property under the y-axis property, we see that it has a particular description at the bottom under the property window. All properties can be changed during runtime as well. That can be done through it as an operator or programmatically through your own code. During runtime, you can either right-click on the window to bring up the runtime menu, and remember that we can disable each of these individual features, or you can select from the toolbar the Edit icon. Let's see how we would define a remote data source.